Today's video is going to be on the bureaucracy in the federal courts. I'm actually going to be starting with the federal courts. Both these groups are all about accountability and holding everyone accountable. Now, this will probably be done in two parts because I'm going to do the judicial branch in one video and the bureaucracy in another. This should be review, so one thing to think about is writing down only what you need. If you don't need everything, then don't write everything down. Alright, for the judicial branch. The Constitution doesn't say all that much about the judicial branch. It says there has to be a Supreme Court, they should have life tenure for good behavior, that they can't have their compensation reduced during their services, and that Congress can then establish anything else they need in terms of inferior courts. What that means is the only thing we're guaranteed in the Constitution is the Supreme Court with life tenure for judges. They also put original jurisdiction in the Supreme Court, but they limit that very much to states versus national, states versus states, ambassadors, and public ministers. And the main goal here was to remedy or to fix the failings of the Articles of Confederation, which had left all judicial matters up to the states and did not have a Supreme Court. The idea was we do need kind of a consistent way that courts operate throughout the entire United States, that each state should not be 100% different. Now, Federal 78 was the Federalist paper that argued for why we should be able to have a national top Supreme Court. And it was because it's the least dangerous branch. The reason was because it doesn't have the power of the sword or the power of the purse. So the court cannot fund programs, nor can they force compliance with their rulings. Now, the Constitution, of course, can change, and the legislative branch is the one that sets up the court system. So the Judiciary Act of 1789 set up the writ of mandamus, which forces a lower court to do what the higher court says. So that's because of congressional law. So the Supreme Court really started out with very little power, but that has been expanded over time. Now, in the United States, we have, by law, by Congress, set up a three-leveled court system. The first level is the district court. There are 94. They hear 342,000 cases a year. The second level is the appeals court. There are only 12 of those. They have a panel of judges. No case can start in the Court of Appeals. You must be appealed from a lower court. Then, of course, we have the Supreme Court. There's only one of them. They hear appeals, and we know there's only one. They hear very few cases. Now, the court's real power comes from, of course, the Marbury versus Madison case and judicial review, which gives the Supreme Court the right to declare laws unconstitutional, and that anything not directly related to the Constitution can only reach the Supreme Court through the appellate courts. Now, the court procedure. When it comes to how to become a judge, you start with the president nominating you, and the Senate will then confirm you in a vote. They'll hold hearings and they'll interview you. That's where the litmus test comes in. The litmus test is not in the Constitution, but it is important. And they have a vote in the committee, which then gets sent to the floor. Of course, what this means is that politics plays a huge role in this whole process. Now, the whole system of our government works on the system of precedent, which is the idea that all lower courts use the power of the Supreme Court to make their decisions in all similar cases. If you have a case that's about murder in the first degree, and it has the exact same circumstances as another case of murder in the first degree, then those sentences, the decision, everything should be the same, done in the same way. So precedent is key. And stare decisis is where the power of the court comes from. The Supreme Court only hears one case at a time, but that case decides every single future case that's done in the same way. So Brown versus Board is important because every case that comes up about segregation is going to be decided in the same way as Brown versus Board. Roe v. Wade is important because not only did it affect that woman, it affects every future law written about abortion. And any state that attempts to write a law restricting abortion, Roe v. Wade would be used to stop that law. All right, certiorari. To get cert and to get into the Supreme Court, you must be granted the writ of certiorari, which means you're accepted by the court. This is, of course, important because if you're not accepted by the court, then your case can't be changed. That means the decision stays the way it is. And the rule of 4 is how you get certiorari. 4 justices need to agree to hear the case, and the Chief Justice will then put it on the docket. Now, of course, they have limited time. So being Chief Justice is like being the chair of a committee. You get to decide when and where it gets heard, or if it even gets heard at all. And if you run out of time, you run out of time. Now, the Solicitor General is, of course, the chief lawyer of the executive branch. They can submit a brief or written statement saying they want or don't want the Supreme Court to hear a case. What we've seen is that half the cases heard will involve the Solicitor General, which is what we can see is the Supreme Court pays attention to what the President wants. What is very important to understand, though, is the Solicitor General just makes an argument. The court makes their final decision. And while they may be thinking a lot about what the President wants, they never have to do what the President wants. The President cannot boss them around. Once they get the job, they have it for life. And the only people who can remove them are Congress. And as we know, Congress and the President often don't agree on anything. So the President can't order them around. He can just ask them to hear a case through the Solicitor General. Now, the Supreme Court, when they make decisions, of course, a brief must be submitted. So once you've been accepted to the court, you will be required to submit a brief, which is just a written statement that gives the legal arguments, relevant facts, and precedent for your side. Both sides, the plaintiff and the defendant, will submit a brief. Of course, others during this period of time can submit briefs, and we call them amicus briefs. They're written and submitted by those not directly involved in the case, and of course we know they come from all sorts of different people. Individuals, interest groups, and the government, including the Solicitor General. The only thing you'd have to do is pay a small court fee. Once the briefs have been submitted, you'll be given a date, and that date is when you get to go in front of the court. Typically, each side only gets 30 minutes to summarize the key points of their case, and the justices will often interrupt to ask questions and or challenge a statement. So you will get interrupted by these justices a lot. They'll only let you get a few minutes in before they start asking you questions and putting you on the spot because they've already read your legal brief and they don't need you to go over it again. Now, once oral arguments have happened, sometime the Supreme Court will then meet in the conference. This happens every 2 weeks where they discuss the cases they have heard. All 9 justices will be present. It's very secret and they debate the cases. They do not keep any minutes. Then, once they've made their decision, they vote. They will write the opinions. For major cases, the court will have at least one written opinion stating the reasoning behind their decision. This is used to set precedent. So, of course, this is very important. And the Chief Justice, if in the majority, gets to pick who writes it. Now, there's 3 kinds of opinions: majority, concurring, and dissenting. Now, when it comes to actually making the decision, the question is, what are they thinking about? First, they have to decide what case to take. Why did they hear a gay marriage case? Why aren't they taking an abortion case? They only take around 70 to 80 cases per year, so the question is, what are they trying to do with those cases? They'll take a lot of non-controversial ones on top of a lot of controversial ones. So, a lot of times they maybe want to make current policies clearer and establish an official way of interpreting policies. So for example, if they see that appellate court over here in District 1 and appellate court in District 3 have both heard very similar cases on whether or not a student can be strip searched in a school, and they decided them in different ways, where one appellate court said yes they can and another appellate court said no they can't, the Supreme Court may come in to establish the one official way. When Obamacare was challenged by different states, 2 appellate courts said it is constitutional and 2 said it wasn't, which meant the Supreme Court had to make a choice because all of these courts were on the same level. They're the second highest level in the United States. So we needed the one single Supreme Court to make the official policy. Now, if they want to change current precedent, so Plessy versus Ferguson, that said separate but equal was okay, way back in the 1870s. Now, we're in the 1950s, and the Warren Court decided they wanted to change things. They didn't like the way things were going. They thought that Plessy was the wrong decision, and they wanted to make up for it in Brown versus Board. So they wanted to change the case. When we talk about these litmus tests, senators are looking to see if they can find a justice who wants to change the precedent of Roe v. Wade. They want someone who will change the abortion case and make it different for the future so that states can, in fact, outlaw abortions. They may also just take a case to keep other branches of the government happy. Maybe Congress is getting upset because they keep losing cases, and so the Supreme Court might take one they know that they would like the decision of. Because remember, they need the other two branches to enforce their decisions. So they have a lot of things to think about when they decide what cases to even take, let alone how to decide them. Of course, the second decision is how to decide the case. We, of course, want them to think about the laws and the Constitution. But many people think it would be foolish not to think about the effects of your decision. And so the justices are thinking about that. They know that every case in the future could be decided this way. So it's a big question of whether or not it'll do more harm or more good. Also, they have to think about how it affects their position. What if the president gets so mad that he decides to work with Congress to add 5 more justices to the court and pack it with his supporters so that they can stop making decisions they don't like? You can't piss them off too much for too long. And of course, we're thinking about policy in America. So what is at stake? Our very laws, how laws will be enforced, our civil rights, who can have them and when, the Supreme Court's relationship to other branches. I mean, all of this is very, very, very important. Another thing they're thinking about is policy, strategy, and context. They're thinking about their political party and their personal beliefs. If you're liberal, you believe a certain way. And if you're conservative, you believe differently. That may not be because you're trying to play favorites. It's just what you believe. And as a judge, that's your whole thing, to use your judgment. So some wonder, is it all just predetermined? What we do see a lot of times is that all the liberal judges vote one way, all the conservative judges vote another. And so we get them split a lot. And currently there's only one justice who we call the swing vote because he kind of goes on liberal and conservative sides. But everyone else seems pretty stuck in their one corner. They, of course, also have to think about the other branches in their enforcement and whether or not they'll enforce the decision. And they have to look at public opinion, history, and anything else. It's not just about the facts of the case. Now, when it comes down to it, personal beliefs have to play a role. They might believe that something is best for America, and that's what they should do. In judicial activism, those people believe justices should be creating policy. Restraint, that they should limit to only enforcing the laws that always exist and follow precedent in the U.S. Constitution. Of course, interpreting the Constitution is a huge deal. Not everyone agrees. And of course, as we said, there is no enforcement, so we have to be thinking about that. When it comes to the executive branch, their checks on the court are the nomination process and enforcement through the bureaucracy, and the fact that they can sign the laws of the Senate. The legislative branch also is part of the nomination process. They can impeach, they can pass laws, and of course they can also amend the Constitution. Now, just some quick things here to kind of review. Brown v. Board is about the 14th Amendment. Baker v. Carr, I don't remember. Regents versus California Bakke, 14th Amendment. Mapp v. Ohio, 4th. Gideon, 6th. Miranda, 5th. Now the number of justices. This is the final slide on the courts, and then bureaucracy will be the next video. According to the Constitution, there is no official number of justices. So just remember that. No official number. Today we have 9. We could have 3. We could have 15. We don't have to replace a nominee when they leave, but we choose to. We currently have 9. All right. Again, another video is coming. This is only part 1.